All right. Welcome everybody to yet another kind of exploration of the business case for, in this case, agility. I'm Devlin Lyles, Chief Consulting Officer of Improving, and today I'm joined by Don McGreal. Don is probably one of our most experienced agilists at the company, author of the best-selling book, The Professional Scrum Product Owner, and the VP of our learning solutions. And so he oversees our coaching, our training, our kind of lunch and learns and all sorts of these things. So he's going to be kind of helping us to explore the topic of agility and the business case for it. A couple of things, if you've never attended one of these, that I want to highlight for you is this series is meant to take some conversations that happen typically behind closed doors, either between improvers or between improving and their clients, and really just put a microphone and a video camera in that room and suss out some of those pieces. It's not about your traditional reasoning. It's about really trying to find the right arguments, the right business case to make a convincing case for whatever it is we're talking about to the business that we're serving. We're going to be looking behind those measures on how to evaluate the choice. And Don and I have talked about it. We're going to agree not to attack each other with jargon. So if you hear jargon or acronyms, we're going to call each other out on that so that we can have kind of a plain English conversation about the benefits and the costs of agility in the modern world. So the scenario we picked for this is we've had many clients come up to ask us to help with an agile transformation, but one that really stood out was a medical services and device company. They wanted to come through and look at agility applied to their business, their IT. They've gotten a ton of internal recommendations for it. And so the business leaders reached out to us and were like, hey, we've been hearing that we should lean into this agile mindset methodology because it's going to make us better. A lot of our competitors are already doing it, and it's going to help us get through this current recession. And so kind of Dawn, starting from there, why agility? Like if I'm that business leader, why agility? Why would I want to kind of keep going down this management consulting fad that seems to always pick a new thing every 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, obviously agility has had the reputation of being, IT software centric. I mean, software is written in the Agile Manifesto quite a bit. But ultimately, I mean, the most success we've seen is when, we see it as an organizational piece. I mean, why do we want IT to go agile? It's ultimately got to provide benefits to the business. Otherwise, why bother? So I don't even like drawing a line between business agility and an IT agility. It's the true sense of the word agile. We want to be fast, quick. We want to be able to respond to market needs, and things are only getting crazier out there. Things aren't simpler. So the market is crazy. The S&P 500 has never been as volatile. Big companies who have been established for a long time are no longer, they're wavering as well. And small startup companies are competing with them. So Agile is more, we want to be nimble as an organization. So how do we do that?
That makes sense. And so is it naive of me as a business person to go, I want to have an agile transformation. I want to be agile. Sounds like that's not what you're advising.
Yeah, I mean, and we do get that quite a bit, right? We try to avoid the word transformation as much as possible. It's not like you're going to go into an agile cocoon and emerge a beautiful agile butterfly, right? You're not going to change completely. And the best way I can explain it, because I've been asked a lot by organizations, how will I know when I'm agile? And I had an executive ask me that, CIO, and I had to think about it. I thought about all the organizations I've worked with in the past. And could I point to one and just claim them as agile? I can't. But if I asked any one of them, would they go back to what they were doing? Are they more agile than they were yesterday? They say yes. So it's just like any other set of values that you might have as a person. It's a journey. You're going to be working at it. You're going to fail. You're going to stumble. But there will never be a moment where you're like, hey, we've arrived and we have a big old agile party to celebrate the fact that we are now agile. There is no switch. I kind of compare it to my own value system. Like if I value trust or respect or something like that, I'm trying to improve. There will never be a day where I go, I've achieved it. Hooray, I am now respectful. But if I compare myself to 5 years ago, I could say, am I more respectful from back then? I expect to say yes. Do I slip up from time to time? Sure. It's a journey, and we have to change the way we work, and just be focused on it all the time. Yeah.
Okay, so in that frame where it's kind of a new way of approaching kind of the journey we've been on, if the journey that we're on currently in the business is kind of cost reduction and focusing on customer retention going into a recession, how's Agile going to help me on that journey, right? Because if you're saying don't value Agile for being Agile, but value it for how it serves you,
Yeah.
How does it serve me in those places?
Yeah, and that's another key point is the goal should never be Agile. The goal should be these existing business objectives that you might have, right? So as a business person, that's where I would start, is that we can't say to you, like if anybody asks you as a leader in the business side, why are we going Agile? Your answer can't be, well, that's the strategy, or everybody else is doing it. Our competition is doing it. We need to be looking at Agile as not the destination, but as a way to achieve our goals. So, and as leaders on the business side, you need to be prepared to answer the question on how Agile can get us there. So I think you brought up, was it customer retention, or so if that's an objective, then that's an objective with or without Agile. So we need to be prepared to explain is that Agile can get us to better customer retention. And, we can help with that. We can help, point to other organizations that have done it and examples of where it's helped. But if we can say, all right, well, if Agile is a way of working that will get you with your customer more often, you're going to be working with them. You're going to be showing them bad stuff. You're going to get their input, and you're going to set expectations with them. And you're going to customize this. You're going to listen to them. You're going to reverse course to meet their needs. That hopefully is a strategy for customer retention. So we are going Agile so that we can help retain. We have an issue in our organization. We're losing customers. They're not happy, and we feel that Agile can get us there. And so we have to be able to make that. So again, the goal isn't be Agile. The goal is customer retention. Agility can help. The goal is lower costs, and here's how Agile can help. Lower cost of maintenance and building things that nobody uses, high costs there. So we have to be prepared to link the two. And that's one of the first things we do with organizations like yours. If you came to us about going Agile or saying you want an Agile transformation, one of the first things we try to do is say, let's come up with an Agile change vision, which basically means why Agile? How are we going to answer the question? Anyone in an organization asks us why Agile, we have the same response.
That makes sense. And so if we're going to try and frame kind of implementation of some of these Agile methodologies and in the success metrics of cost reduction, customer retention, that seems like a lot of work to try and measure these things far more frequently. Is there a significant cost to changing that way of working? Like, how do I measure the ROI of cost to implementation versus what I'm going to get out of it?
The implementation of Agile?
Of one of the methodologies, yeah.
Yeah, like, so, if we're Scrum and we're going to train a bunch of people, or we're going to set up some Kanban boards and buy some tools and all that. Yeah, that's a very valid question, and we need to be able to answer that, right? I've had conversations with executives a lot where I've said, how are you going to know when we're successful? So, you want to go Agile. So how are you going to know when you're successful? And I've literally had responses like, when 80% of our people are trained or attain this certification. That obviously can't be the goal. And it's kind of back to what we were saying. So let's measure success in terms of customer, the things that are important to the business, time to market. And so what we can do is help set up those objectives, those measures early on. And then as we implement these things, we want to be able to show that return on investment. You spend all this money on training and some coaches, and some books and some tools. What have we been able to show for that? Well, in the last 3 months, you before we showed up, you had released 3 times. Now you're getting stuff out to your customer. You did it 6 times in those 3 months. So there's a rolling window where we're showing some sort of value. We've been tracking data with your employees. Your employees seem to be more motivated as well. So we come up with some hypotheses at the beginning and we start measuring it. That's going to be key to this. And ultimately, if it's Agile doing it or not, who would care, as long as those things are going in the right direction, right? You're not going to be able to link it perfectly, but as long as we're achieving results, I think we're good.
So it's similar to marketing at that point. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We do have a question. What about industries where iterating is kind of impossible? Think medical or aerospace, where making a mistake might mean someone dies. Can Agile work there?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, and we've got clients that are absolutely in those fields. And I guess I would say that it's even more important. I think one of the big hurdles that we need to get across with our customers is, what does iterating mean, or what do these feedback loops mean? From us, a consumer, we may see the end result, like a vaccine on the marketplace, but that's not the first time they put it out there, and they didn't prove the value of that vaccine and the safety of that vaccine by just doing a lot of upfront research and documentation. Putting somebody on the moon, those things, they didn't prove that was going to work. Like the first time they tried it was absolutely not the actual trip to the moon or launching a missile. So we may not notice it, but they're doing lots in terms of releasing and getting feedback and validating our hypotheses along the way. And we've got a large pharmaceutical client, and I was being asked, like, from a project manager, like, we absolutely need to know the date and the budget and all that, which of course you need to know a date and a budget, but we have to have the ability to change as we learn more. And then I thought about it and I asked them, how do you guys build drugs? I mean, certainly you're not. So if you're asked for a date and a budget to cure a disease and to create a vaccine, what's that budget going to be? How would you know? And so I asked them, and somebody in the class I was teaching knew, and they said, well, actually, yeah, you put a hypothesis down and then it gets approved. And now it gets approved as any one of these, I forget how many, but 3 categories, class A, B, and C. And with that, you get a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time. Now, in that time, are they expected to cure the whole disease? Absolutely not. What they're going to be doing is working through to show value before the money runs out. So how do you show value for curing that disease? Well, if the molecules are behaving the way the hypothesis suggested, if the lab animals that you're using without the need for FDA and all those approvals and validated requirements and stuff, if you're seeing positive results there. So if I can show positive results, that is value to the customer, because it's literally more funding to take it to the next stage. So when we release, we're not forcing people to release to everybody in the world. And so what we do need to do is prove experiments. I like to see on product backlogs. Like if we can formulate a hypothesis and prove through a survey or an experiment a result that would help us fund the next piece, that is iterating, and that's the way we need to look at it.
So I don't want anybody to miss what Don just hit on here, because this is something that ties directly to the overlap of business and agility, is the idea that MVP is typically much, much smaller than we truly believe it is. And that there's steps along the way, right? A proof of concept is a valuable step to prove we can accomplish something, whether that's a medical device to prove that a new definition of a heart valve, like a new construction methodology, works. And it may only work in the small scale in a lab, but that's a first step along the path. The space example that he used is brilliant, right? There was an entire series of missions called the Gemini missions that were, each one of the launches was to prove a single component of the Apollo missions to go to the moon. And each one of them incrementally proved that we had the technical capacity, that we had the manufacturing capacity, and we had the people knowledge to actually get to the moon. Without Gemini proving those, the budget for Apollo never gets approved.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
I'm a bit of a space nerd.
Yeah, no, that's
So
great.
that incremental prove out is important. And we do this all the time, right? I've worked on teams where it was spikes, where we'd go, hey, this technology thing might make a big impact. Here's a time box and some dollars. But we understand this in the business world incredibly well. We talk about burn rates and we talk about project reevaluations and lean portfolio management and strategic budgeting. We've been shortening those cycles in the business world for years, right? You used to have 10, 15, 20, 25-year capital horizons that are now 18 months to 3 years. And so as we've shortened those horizons, our measurement structure has to get faster. And it's similar to, it sounds like, the agility side of that, in which you've got to prove the capital expenditure so you can get the next piece of capital expenditure.
And lowering the cost of experimentation is a big part of it, right? So in IT and in software, it's kind of easy because you could just build something and run it somewhere, right? But in the business, it gets a bit more expensive. So if you can find ways to lower your, I guess we call it sometimes the customer absorption cost, ways of experimenting. So what we ultimately, when you try to release, you weigh the value that you're going to give your customer to the cost it's going to, and often your releases may have negative value. So you look for ways of reducing that cost. One example would be an airline who needs to release software, and we've run into this, to a group of union workers. And we were told, oh, we can't just do that because the union rules say that we got to train them all. Because they've probably been burnt before by a surprise software system installed that was built a year and they've never consulted on it. And now they say, no, for the union rules, we need to be trained on this stuff. So now we're coming around saying we want to release every 2 weeks. They're like, you're going to train thousands of gate agents every 2 weeks? Of course not. The cost would be outrageous for the amount of value we get every 2 weeks. So how do we lower that customer absorption cost? Let's try it with one gate. Let's train them and all the way through. And then up to a point, we can roll it out to everybody else with some heavier training. But then in the meantime, maybe a way for the business to be more agile is to start talking to the unions about what exactly training is. Is there a way we can lower that cost? Would a video work? Would built in, like in your apps work, where there's little pop-ups that show you how to use something? What if we could build that in? That makes us more agile as a business as well, if we change the way we train, or the way we go do our compliance and governance stuff, and which is often a reason people put up there for not being able to be agile.
It's interesting because when we look at the business processes that we design, whether that's HACCP in kind of the food manufacturing space, right? Hazard analysis and critical control points is about measuring often so that you can intervene at the earliest potential sign of a problem, so that you don't end up having large scale recalls. You're able to isolate and remediate a problem before it gets out to a customer. To the risk control systems in life criticals, in which your software or hardware package is going to directly have an impact to the safety of a human being, whether that's in the medical space or oil field operations. Over the last 25 to 30 years, in every one of those business cases, the answer has been measure far more frequently and get that measurement into actionable intelligence as close to the event as possible. And it sounds very heavily like the kind of agile approach you were advocating for a little while ago, Don, of, we want a lower cost of experimentation. We want to democratize some of that control.
Yeah.
How do you keep us moving towards our strategic goals if we're pushing insight that far away from the budgetary control?
Yeah, I mean, those are often things we kick to the end, right? Those high cost, high risk things is that, hey, let's build this, whatever it is we're doing for 8 to 10 to 12 months. And then, hey, before we release this, why don't we check with compliance? Why don't we check with security? Why don't we? And that's huge risk to the business. And so, yeah, bringing those up front can be scary and costly. It's like what we're basically saying is we need to roll those in all the way through. So if you're using Scrum as a way to achieve agility, how do we do that within a sprint? We're doing 2-week sprints. How do we, maybe the compliance people are on the team, or maybe we can automate some of this stuff. Maybe there's like, I don't know, but we need to figure this out. And this is what so many heavily regulated clients. We work for a lot of big companies who have all sorts of regulation, and from energy to pharmaceuticals to aviation, right? It's crazy. But the message we keep giving them is your competition has the same constraints. If we can be just a little bit better, a little bit agile in the way we overcome these costs, that's a competitive advantage. So if we can do it just a little bit better than them, then we're in a better situation. So we can't just, I don't let them just chalk it up saying, well, we're heavily regulated, so we can't be agile. No, it's an opportunity now. If you can figure out how to do this more often, and you're going to lower the cost and the risk of waiting too long. So I'd say it's on the other side. If you wait too long, there's a higher cost. If you do it up front, it's a lower cost. Long term, anyways. Short term, it might be higher.
So that gets to something that we feel pretty heavily. We go back to kind of the example case that we're using is our customers, and specifically this one in this example case, is they deal with disruption far more frequently than they ever have, right? Medical device and service space, market leader for 30 years. And now, because of democratization of manufacturing and some of the easier ways of getting into this space, they're being disrupted and they're fearing losing of clients. How is Agile going to help with that disruption mitigation, right? The business impact of somebody coming along and, as you pointed out, doing it just like 5% better could make all the difference.
Yeah, I mean, and what do they say? It's not always the first to do it, it's the second that really get the benefit, right? Once the market sort of used to it, it's the second one.
The second mover advantage. Yeah.
Is that what it is? So I mean, it's a little bit like that. So I guess what that means is when you see it happening, are you able to respond, right? Because there'll be signs. And now certainly I can get into how, you know, in a more agile organization, we'll be innovative and first to market on a lot of things. But I think even there, being able to respond, like the popular examples of like BlackBerry with the iPhone and Kodak with the digital camera, even though they invented it, or Blockbuster with Netflix, you know, we saw it happening. They had the resources to do it. Why didn't they? And so the ability to move, to change, to pivot, and that's really what Agile is all about, right? Being able to adjust that, not be too locked into a set of requirements, being open, planning to replan is what we're talking about here. Executives know this. When I talk about at the executive level about Agile, like they know they have to do this. You know, this is exactly what they've been talking about the whole time. They know the problem of being too set in their ways. But along those lines, we talked about metrics earlier. One of my favorite things to measure, it's simple. I really keep it down to a simple way of measuring it, but it just gets us focused on it more, is our innovation ratio or innovation rate. And that's we know what it's like when we're so busy with stuff, and the whirlwind of everyday activity can just consume us and keep us busy every single day, just responding to customers, complaining about stuff and bugs and all that stuff. Well, when do we have time to do these more strategic things, the R&D, the things that are going to get us the innovation, if you're not focused on it? So one way is to measure it, like what percentage of the work you're doing each week is spent on what you would categorize as strategic new things versus just the everyday, the whirlwind activities. So the step one is just start measuring it. So if you do have, let's say, if you're using Scrum and you have a backlog or whatever you're using, you've got a list of stuff in a certain period of time, how much of that stuff is innovative versus maintenance. And then see what changes you can make to increase the innovation side of it. Is it just a matter of you know, dedicating a day a week or a certain percentage of your time, or a team's reserving space in a sprint in Scrum? or whatever tool mechanism they have, but just drawing them attention to it to shift that, having better quality so that things aren't paying attention to as much on there, or having customers saying no to customers often is key to this, because they don't know what those innovative things are necessarily. So saying, hey, I know this is important, but we're probably not going to get to it because we are focusing on some of these other things as well. Like, so just measuring it, a simple ratio can help with that innovation and be first to market, or beat the competition after they've released something.
Okay, before we go to the next point, we have another question. You've mentioned experimentation a bunch. How on earth do you enable the organization to think about experimentation? Most people are statisticians, so just throwing numbers at them seems insufficient. What kind of culture change, if any, is needed?
Yes, it's a good question. I guess there's this, if you've ever heard of the truth curve, right? You don't need to experiment on every little thing. So if you think about the cost of building something versus your confidence in its value. So not some things you like, if we build this, we've already got customers lining up to do it. So we don't need to experiment. Let's get the dang thing done. Like, let's get to work. But then there's some other things where you're like, this could be huge, but we don't know. This could be a market game changer, but we just simply don't know. There's a big risk. If we invested so much into this thing and it's costly, if it's cheap, just go do it, and then put it out there and see if anybody uses it. But if it's so costly to do, that's where the experiments come in. So I don't know, if you want to get tactical about it, I've done this with groups. If you've got a list of stuff, like, go through them and go, what's the cost of doing these, and what's our confidence that this will produce value? And for any one of those that has high cost and low confidence, then we should design experiments for them. And I like just put them right in the backlog. They've got value. The results of an experiment it gives us a validated learning. They've got value, just like that feature that's on your list as well. And so the result at the end of a sprint in Scrum would be the results of that experiment. And then hopefully, like, I have a litmus test for my backlog in Scrum, is that I spend a lot of time on the product owner side. Who gets value from these things? If the answer is somebody outside of the Scrum team, then it's worth doing. If the answer is it's for somebody on the team, it's not worth on the list. We can still do it, but it's not worth on the product backlog. So it's different than, let's go do research to see how big this thing is. If your customer's not willing to pay for the results of that, then don't put it on the backlog. You can go do it inside of the sprint while you're still delivering value. But I want to be able to communicate to some stakeholder, some customer, we're going to go find out if somebody wants this, and we're going to give you the results. And if the results are good, then you'll want to pay us to do this. If not, then we can pivot and go in another direction. You save your money. That's value to your customer. So I try to be quite tactical with these things, and just your product backlog items can be actual hypothesis statements with results. If the results is X, here's what we'll do, and if it's Y, we'll do this.
So something that I want to tack onto this, because I think that the tactical piece that Don just outlined is brilliant, and we've used it a lot. But to the culture change part of that question, I had the pleasure of working at probably one of the best examples I've ever seen of this, working with Jay Steinfeld over at blinds.com. One of their core values was experiment without the fear of failure. And the structure by which that comes to fruition matters a lot. If somebody has a failed experiment, toleration of it isn't effective, right? Them not getting fired isn't an incentive. Celebrating the failed experiments just as fervently as you celebrate the successful ones, because they're a part of the process on the way to success, is hugely important. And then helping to drive the understanding of what the measures of success are, so that we know when to bail out early. One of the proudest moments of a Scrum team I was ever on was during my tenure there, and it was very early on. So the CEO and the CFO were all kind of sitting at the sprint review, and there was a feature we'd been working on, and we were demoing the feature, and one of the senior developers was kind of walking through the demo, and the CFO asked a question about cost mitigation, because it was very much a cost centric feature. And rather than the product owner answering, or the CEO answering, or somebody from marketing answering, the senior developer who was demoing it goes, well, based on our addressable market today, here's the average cost per order that we're going to save. So if we scale to this point, that's this amount in cost savings. If we scale to where we're aiming for in our yearly targets, that's this amount of cost savings. And it blew the CFO away. He was fairly kind of new to the interactions with the team. But the fact that a dev on the team knew the dollars and cents of the P&L impact of a feature was because product ownership and that discipline had been driven into the team of, what we do is not just building technology for technology's sake, but to solve a business problem. And those business problems, when solved well, show up on the balance sheet. They show up on the P&L. And that piece of visibility and having no fear of failure, those two are big for the cultural shift for experimentation. Sometimes you're going to choose efficiency. You're going to choose to just drive to a result because it's already been validated. And sometimes you're going to choose effectiveness of, let's validate before we move forward. And managing where you're on that continuum is incredibly important for spending the company's money well.
Yeah, those are really good points. And if you go back, to the original reason we're doing the experiment, if you're thinking about the truth curve, is that doing it without it is very expensive and risky. So a failed experiment, look how much money we saved, not building the actual thing, which would be an experiment too, right? You spent $1 million building this thing and nobody used it. Well, that was a failed experience, but people but people will be less happy about that one than your quick experiment that you can do within a sprint to see if people are going to use it. Yeah.
And to that point, you don't need a top-down mandate, right? You don't need the CEO saying, these are our core values to do this. I've seen product owners do this by implementing story time, literally just 15 or 20 minutes, in which they explain from the user's perspective what the impact of a successful completion of that feature is and what impact that'll have on the business. 15 or 20 minutes to go through a feature set. And by doing that, you've instilled in the team's brain the reason behind it. So when they start seeing something in the implementation that would invalidate that reason, they can go back and go, hey, this doesn't match what we talked about as the purpose behind this story. That communication of vision, even at a story level, doesn't require a grand change of culture.
We have another question, which is, how do you handle the investments that benefit the Scrum team, but is hard to explain to the business, like software quality, has direct benefit to the team and eventually value to the business after we've matured?
Yeah, that's a common one too. So I'm not, maybe all my colleagues may not agree with this, but I feel pretty strongly as a product owner that I'll do everything in my power that every single sprint, and I know I'm using Scrum more here, but hopefully you're getting the sense that this is bigger than that, right? This is agility. But if you're using Scrum, which is the most popular way people try to achieve agility, is every single sprint must provide value, but you've got to give something to the business. And no sprint should be, hey, we got a pile of crappy code here and we're going to need to go away and build this for a few sprints. That's the equivalent of taking all your income and put it towards your debt. Like, you need to keep the lights on. And in our world, the lights on that's a value to customers, keeping them close. If you want customer retention, like Devlin was talking about earlier for his situation, we need to keep them close. We need to show them stuff value. Now, it may be a lot less. So that's a lot of it is in the product owner side. A good product owner will understand that this is is a benefit to them by doing this. So if you can, we're always going to have, let's say, technical debt. Technical debt is not something you either have or you don't. The moment you build anything, you've got debt, meaning you've got to pay to maintain this thing. And that a professional team has to minimize that as much as possible. And if there's a lot of debt, we need to figure out a way to reduce it. So a certain capacity each sprint is a common way of doing it. And I don't get mathematical with it. I usually just have a list, and I'll make it transparent to these people who are complaining about it. It's like, here are all the things that need to be cleaned up. And we just add to this, if anybody finds something as they're working through it, they add it to this list. Now, is every sprint, is that list getting bigger or smaller? So business, what's the consequence if this just keeps continuing to grow? It is going to grow exponentially. The interest on that debt is going to get higher and higher. So as you see this grow, what are we going to need to do? We're going to have to lower the amount we spend each month, like just like a credit card debt, or each sprint, so that we can pay down this debt. So if we can at least pay the minimal, which is seeing this list get smaller, not all the way down, but just smaller each sprint, that should make sense to everybody. And I think, so the quick answer is I'm going to keep it transparent. I'm going to explain, I don't know, financial debt the same way. But it's also worth mentioning, because we were talking about experimentation. Experimentation can create a lot of debt, and because debt isn't always bad. As a person or individually, sometimes debt is good, right? We all have mortgages and stuff. Why? Because the return on investment is still there. The value I get for having a home outweighs the interest I pay on that debt. Or I invest in stocks, same thing, right? I hope to get a return on that investment. So if I'm going to do an experiment, I don't want to build something. Let's say it's a prototype experiment where I'm going to put something out there to see if they're going to use it. Why do I want to build that with the utmost quality if we're not even sure people want it? So I think it's valid for a team to build something in a quick and dirty way, to put it out there, and it'll look like they get a lot done in a short period of time. And that's the danger. We've got to make sure that if you're going to do that, if you're going to get yourself in debt on purpose, there's a plan to get out of debt. And so as a product owner, I have to make sure that all my stakeholders understand, leaders and managers, that I see that how much we were able to do for that prototype that looks cool. There's a lot of messiness underneath that. We can do this, but we need a plan, meaning you're going to see a lot less value directly in future sprints as we get ourselves out of debt if this experiment proves successful and we continue and we choose to go forward. So making it transparent and understanding that sometimes it's okay to create debt as long as you have a plan to get out of debt. So a transparent plan of getting out of debt is the best answer I have for that.
So I will add to this. I hope you noticed that Dawn's explanation didn't talk about how hard it was to program, didn't talk about the pain of reading the existing code base, didn't talk about we've got 8 versions of this NuGet package. He talked about it in financial terms. And I love that, because oftentimes we try and justify purely technical team serving things in team serving terms, but we don't sell to somebody in our terms, we sell to them in theirs. And when the team is trying to take on technical debt, they're selling to the product owner, they're selling to the business the idea that this is a good investment, it's a good spend of the time. But the thing I would caution in this is, it's okay to have debt that you're never going to pay off, ever, right? Like, institutional debt is a thing and it's healthy, right? I don't need to get out of debt right now, right? The natural evolution of my mortgage is that it will get out of debt. But if I were to take all the money I have and I pay off my mortgage, that money with inflation is going to get cheaper over time. The same thing is true with the cost of doing business or having a team. Is there's features who could have a greater return than that debt is costing us. It's called net present value. And so the financial terms around this are built for this very argument of, is it better to pay off debt with my money today, buy new market share, new features with my money today? And so the idea that we should get out of debt, be very careful with, because there's an entire segment of good debt that is that low interest asset backed mortgage type debt. We have that in technology where we're going to continue to rev new features to go after market share. And we're going to leave some of the lingering things like, oh, there's a spelling problem on a technical document that only one person's found in 10 years. We could go spend time fixing that, but it's not worth it. There's also then the other side of the equation where we've got like high interest payday loan kind of technical debt where it is crushing the team. And I have found that the differentiator is the payday loan crushing the team kind of technical debt. You can explain in financial terms what it's costing the business. Like it's costing 20% of the team's time every sprint dealing with production issues from this area of the code base because of the way it was brought to fruition. That's equal to X dollars of missed features. But put it in dollars and cents, because once you do, you don't even have to present it to somebody. If you put it in dollars and cents and go, it's going to take 16 weeks of work to save 4 hours a quarter, you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. It'll never pay itself off. You can be the barometer of whether it's a good business case just by trying to put it into those numbers.
I love throwing my analogies at you because you take it, you stretch them all the way and give me all sorts of other ways of using it and talking about it. That's great. And I love that. You're right. Yeah. Having a mortgage, we're always going to have some debt. So fixing every little thing is not realistic. But yeah, there are those big things that you got to pay off those high interest debt. And you still keep debt manageable, I think is what we're the conclusion, right? You just acknowledge you're always going to have debt. That's the original definition of technical debt. It's the moment you release something, you're in debt. But let's keep it manageable, and it's not growing wildly all the time. And that's where I like to show it. Like I talk about a team I worked with that had a wall of debt. They had this wall they drew up with slime and cracks and a spider web and stuff. And every time they saw something, they just stuck a sticky on there. And it wasn't like mathematical. It was just, hey, when we started this sprint, there was 8 things. When we ended it, there's 12. Like debt is growing. What are we going to do? So when they ran into something, they'd say, can we fix it now? Fix it. If not, put it on the wall. And then next time in sprint planning, it's like, can we take some of those off? Like we want to take at least 4, get to back where we were last time anyways. And then that reduced the amount they could take from the product backlog. It was just a conversation. It's just about keeping it transparent.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of creative ways you can go about some of these, like bug bounty systems. And we used to set aside half a day every sprint after the sprint was delivered, right? Because we ended on Fridays, great plan, and lunch. And then you come back in the afternoon and it was technical debt cleanup or it was experimentation. Like it was kind of free rejuvenation time that helped the team morale and helped to mitigate and keep debt manageable. So there's a lot of ways to solve it. So I want to kind of pull us back a little bit, Dawn, and ask you, you mentioned Xerox and the camera, you mentioned Blockbuster and Netflix and having a chance to buy them. And in each of these cases that you mentioned, and a little bit more on when we were talking about like vision for features, having a good vision and being able to communicate it is effective. So like, what do you consider to be a good vision for a product?
Yeah. And from a business agility standpoint, this is key, right? I find a good vision is, as a product owner, the number one thing I can do, or I found I could do to motivate the team. I got that question all the time. How do I get them to do more or motivate them? Well, money and threats is not the good way. The better way is to give them purpose, have them interact with the customers, can build a relationship. I found a lot of my time was saying, can you guys just talk and come meet each other? And can we like build a relationship with the people doing the work and the people getting value? Because ultimately what I realized is every single thing anyone listening to this does every day is improving somebody's life. And that's a hard thing to think about. We don't always think about that. It should be. And so everything your team is doing is improving somebody's life. Now, have they met that person? That would be cool. So if you could at least introduce them, once in a while in a sprint review or whatever, and have them kind of work with each other or in planning or refinement or whatever that is, you start to build a relationship with that person. That's a huge thing to motivate. So that to me is the vision. A vision is, okay, where are we going to be in the future? Like, what is this customer going to be saying about us when we're successful? That's the way I look. There's some cool techniques where you have to, write a trust pilot review or something of our product or whatever service we're doing 5 years from now or 4 years from now. What's it going to say? What do we want it to say? Write an article in Forbes magazine about what we're doing. That's the vision, and getting us to that. Because way too often, like, I'll go up to a product manager and say, so why are we doing this product? And the answer will be something like, I don't know, the other one's old. We got to replace it. I'm like, what's wrong with old things? Old's not bad. And like, we gotta know why, right? Why are we doing this? And how is this going to improve somebody's life when we replace this? And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to do is the layers upon layers of somebody greenlighting an initiative and then handing it off to somebody to make a budget and then come up with a bunch of requirements, and you take it to some tech team to estimate it, and that's not the people doing the work, and it goes over to this group, and then finally, you're a DBA who spends their days indexing databases, tables, and updating things and saying no to things and adding columns and building schemas. You don't see that, right? You don't see that piece, and it's easier for you to say no, it's not important, or I don't have time for it, without knowing that vision. But if the more you see your job as improving somebody's life, you're more inclined to try or do things you're not comfortable with, help each other out more, learn new things. And that's the importance of the vision. It's the way to get through what I call in my book the product management vacuum, where all that layer of planning and management, it obfuscates that information to the people doing the work. A vision can cut through that cleaner. And I mean, it's a long answer, but that I feel passionate about it.
No, it's a very good answer. So, but you said a few things in there that worry me a little. So does that mean that as we're going down this agility path and we're trying to solve our customer retention and our cost things, that change is going to ripple out into my budgeting system and my project validation and my funding cycles? Or is there a line where it's like, yeah, agility is over there, not over here?
I mean, I guess, are you going to have to change on the business side how you budget stuff and how you create plans? Yes, maybe, ideally, but I feel there's a bit of a problem I run into in the Agile community, where it comes across as Agile doesn't do dates, Agile doesn't do budgets. You just budget as needed, and it's a bit nonsense. It doesn't.
I'm glad you said that, because I have the response of it's nonsense boiling inside of me.
Yeah, it doesn't resonate with the business at all, right? But here's what I hear every time I talk to an executive about these projects and things that don't work, is that there's this big looming date in the future, and everybody's worried about it. Everybody's got their fingers crossed. That's when our budget runs out. That's when everybody's expecting it. We've promised lots of people for it, and everybody's just like, are we going to do it? Are we going to make it? People are pulling all-nighters at the very end, and that's when technical debt gets crazy too. And they wait for this big thing, and they push it out, this big release, and inevitably right afterwards it's fix, because but we got it out. Yeah, there were some hiccups. That's what the industry has come to understand. What I want to do is, regardless of how the budgeting is done, like, even if you want to continue budgeting the way you are, if I am given a date, if I'm given a budget and I had no say in it, a lot of Agilists will say that's crap. You can't be Agile that way. But what I want to say, that's fine. I'll take it just like that pharmaceutical group that gets funding for solving a disease. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, but what I'm going to darn well try to do is show you value along the way, so you will see that it's worth funding it more. So there's a date 8 months out that I've been told to achieve. I've been given a budget. To me, that budget is a team. And if I'm using Scrum, I can equate it to sprints. So I've got $500,000. That's $50,000 a sprint. That's 10 sprints. All right, what can I do? And by the time that big date comes, I'm going to try to reduce the stress. And one way to do that is this is not going to be the first time we release, because this is not going to, it's just going to be yet another date. Why? Because we've released a dozen times before that. We're releasing, we're putting things out, and hopefully it's the most valuable stuff. And I found that when we've done that, people aren't paying us to do a bunch of tasks on a list. People are paying us to create value and solve problems. So even I found that we've been able to do less than the original scope document and go in a completely different direction, doing less, and have our clients completely ecstatically happy with what we did. One group I did, sometimes I wrote articles. We did literally half of what was in the original document, and they were writing articles around Scrum and how great it was in their internal newsletter afterwards. And we didn't even do half of what they were asking for, because we listened to them and we adjusted as necessary. And these executives that are in that position of worrying and thinking, and they're being told all the time, they get the RAG reports, right? The red, amber, green, or watermelon reports, green on the outside, red on the inside. And what I hear, I've heard it more than one occasion, they say, if I had only known, I just wanted to know. It wasn't like, oh, it's fine. Things happen. They understand that, but everybody's hiding it from me. If I'd had only known, then, because I'm managing expectations with my stakeholders and stuff like that, and it makes me look bad. I just want transparency. And so however your budgeting is right now, and whatever dates are out there, just work in that space. Let everybody know if you're way off. It doesn't mean sound the alarm. Let people know, and then we can start to think about what we can do to recover. And maybe that's more budget, maybe that's a different timeline, whatever that is. But like, let's just keep it transparent. When you do that and you listen and adapt to what your customer is asking for, if you say no, then you put them in a victim stance, right? Where they get something they don't want. If you listen to them, they share in that accountability as well. So that's how I get around it, is that I just make it a non-issue. I'll take whatever way we're budgeting now and then let's go. Of course, there are better ways in the Agile space, but it's not always possible.
Makes sense. So you touched on this, and I want to kind of dig into it a little bit further. I hear often, the medical device and services company we're talking about heard often as well, Agile outside of IT, outside of product, sales, marketing, finance, everywhere. Should we try and drive Scrum and Kanban and kind of the agility space into everything?
Not everything, obviously. I mean, we see that like an organization, like in the space you're talking about, there's going to be certain areas where it could be considered overhead, I suppose. I mean, Agile's about, I mean, literally, if you look at the Agile manifesto, it's about individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? Well, aren't there situations where lots of communication between people is wasteful? Like, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. Why do we keep having to solve the same problem over and over? Why do we keep discussing this? Just get it done, right? Like, follow, and in those cases, a process works well. Like, you'll tighten up the process and say, like, just the first thing you should do if you run into a problem is consult the recipe. And if the recipe's wrong, then we fix the recipe. And you go to, and if people keep tripping over the same part of the recipe, maybe let management know so they can do something about it, because the next thing we're doing is going to be similar and we're going to reuse this recipe. You do not want agility there. Do I want creativity as well in an assembly line? Like, do I want them experimenting with it, or a call center where there's a script that they have to follow? So the things that we talk about in agility in terms of, responding to change and higher communication and creativity, customer collaboration. In fact, if I'm building certain things, like I'm building a house, part of how I'm successful is I have the customer sign here a scope document and I hold on to scope as much as possible. And that's my way of reducing costs for my customer. And I make the houses very similar to each other. So customer collaboration is actually seen as, it gets in the way. So we got to be realistic about this, is when we're building new things that nobody can predict. If people are coming with problems and not solutions, then that's where we need agility. That's where we need to experiment, probe, fail, and try again. We don't need to be doing that when the customers are coming to us with solutions. They say, I want a house. Our next response shouldn't be, tell me why you need a house. Could we explore other options for you? They know the problem. They've solved the problem. They're asking you to implement their solution. If they buy a car, if they do these sorts of things, you do not need to be agile in those situations. But when they say, I've got a problem and I don't know, they may say they know this, but they don't know the solution. Nobody knows the solution. Then now the approach should be, well, why do you tell me more about it? Tell me more about the problem. Why would you want this? What's an experiment we can try to see if this is worth it? And that's where Agile, more communication, more customer collaboration, more flexibility is a good thing. And you'll never be able to have a recipe because what you're doing is only ever done once. Yeah.
So Don, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You and I get to have all sorts of fun debates, and I love kind of putting a camera in the room and allowing some folks to see that, and hopefully it helps them to frame the arguments
A lot less
and
cursing.
Conversations. A lot less cursing because it's being recorded. But if you had one thing, like if you wanted everybody attending or watching this in the future to take away one thing about the business case for agility, what would it be?
Maybe I'll go back to what we kind of started with as well, is there's no business agility, IT agility. I think we all want the same thing. We want flexibility. We all agree on the what it is we want. Like I've been doing this activity for 12 years now, about asking project managers or anybody, what are the things that you have seen in successful teams? I don't care if they're the most hardened project manager or the most hippiest agile person out there. They say the same things, a good group of people that communicate, that collaborate, that bring in their customer. We all want the same things. Now, we may not agree with how, and I think that is the problem I see in the agile community. You see all sorts of people complaining and bashing each other and processes and stuff out there on the how. The how is going to change. The agile will stay the same. Agile can't be a fad, because 10 years from now, we're not going to be looking at people over process. That's crazy. Thank God the perfect process and tools came around. The robots took over. It's just not going, we may call it something different, but the what will never change. The how will change a lot. And it's just like any value system. So the takeaway, it's just a value system. Like trust is a value system. Trust, that value is not going to change 1,500, 200 years from now, but ways of applying trust, different books and techniques for creating trust, those are going to come and go. But the actual core concepts are going to always be there. And that's what Agile is. And the reason it's such a buzzy thing is because our world is more complex. There's more need for flexibility. There are less recipes and best practices out there for the types of things that are going on in our world. So treat Agile as the value system, and all these other things, if they help, great. If not, do something else.
Awesome. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Don, for taking the time and joining us. Thank you, everybody else. And make sure you come back next Friday and check out the virtual events. All the topics for the next few months are out there. I appreciate everybody joining us.
Thanks a lot, Devlin. Great talking to you again.
It's great talking to you as well.
All right.